going to get started, even though we have a panelist that's making his way to the future, up the stairs somewhere in an elevator. My name is Marius Wursthausen. I am Director Scenarios at the World Energy Council. You heard my boss, Angela, speaking earlier, and we're going to pick up some of the strands of her conversation about energy transition, but hopefully go a bit deeper into the energy conversation over the next while. Let me ask, before we get into our content and our panel, who of you work in energy in some way, shape, or form? Any energy people in the room? I see a bunch of hands. And the rest of you, well done for not getting into energy. No, I'm kidding. But it's good to have a sense of who's in the room. Welcome. Of who's in the room and the perspectives that you might bring. We are going to have some opportunity for Q&A. And so if you want to ask a specific question, please hold on to it. We'll make space for you to do so. So we're very fortunate to have a great panel with us today. Dr. Aisha, coming to us from Dubai with a Middle East perspective. Deepak, coming to us from India. And so really a global south perspective, really focused on energy access. And then a new arrival to our panel, Mehmet Onel. Thank you, Mehmet, for making the last minute commitment. Working at Shell on energy scenarios. His colleague, Geraldine, who you would have seen on the program, couldn't be with us. And so they upgraded us. Don't tell Geraldine I said so. To Mehmet. And so, colleagues, just by way of framing, as we start the conversation on energy, as we sat listening to the astronauts speak about life in space, I was reminded of a comment someone made recently where they said that Earth is an international space station. And all of humanity are in this one international space station, traveling through space. But we're in the process of poisoning our atmosphere. And that was quite a striking image, that actually we're not taking really good care of this incredible space station that allows us to sustain life in space, called planet Earth. And of course, at the center of that challenge is the energy industry, the energy we all consume, and what we do about that, and how we change that energy system. At the World Energy Council, we like to think about energy through the lens of the energy trilemma. And so we think about this very simple triangle of energy security, energy access or affordability, and energy sustainability. And so as we think about the future of energy, which we're going to do with our panel, we want to be thinking about what is the future of energy security. Can we power the planet? Can we power human progress? Where do we find the energy sources? How do we ensure that that energy is sustainable? How do we ensure that that energy, the cost of producing that energy isn't greater than what the planet can bear? So we think about the ecological ceiling, to quote the donut economics, the ecological ceiling within which we have to operate. But we also have to think about the societal boundaries. What can we do in terms of energy affordability so that we don't operate outside of what society will allow us to do? And so one of the things we're seeing in energy is the challenging of the social license to operate. When we see citizens, activists wanting to just stop oil on the one hand, but other activists wanting cheaper energy now with inflation and rising energy costs. We really have a what we call a safe operating space between that ecological boundary and that social foundation, and we have to find a way to manage energy transition within that space. And so to help us think about that and cast our eyes way out to the future, I'm going to go to our esteemed panel, and we're going to explore the future of energy together. So let me start with Dr. Aisha. You're an energy expert, done some groundbreaking research on nanotechnology within renewable energy. Your opening remarks, what do you see for the future of energy when you look out?
First of all, it's a great pleasure for me to be part of this distinguished panel discussion and this distinguished forum. First of all, let me reflect on the UAE outlook in terms of the energy. As you may know that His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, Allah Hafidhah, he mentioned that we should celebrate the last barrel of oil and think in the future how we will be celebrating this. So UAE has put a very clear strategy in terms of diversifying the energy mix. And we have in Dubai specifically what is known as Dubai Clean Energy Strategy that aims to reach 100% by the year of 2050. The target in 2020 was 7%, and in that year we exceeded that target. We reached 9%. And now in 2030, we have the target to reach 25%. And as I mentioned, in 2050, we will reach 100%. And in order to act on implementing and working on this strategy, we have various projects that are implemented in Dubai and UAE. Specifically in Dubai, we have the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park, which is considered among the largest single-site solar park worldwide, with a target to reach 5,000 megawatt by the year of 2030. Today, Dubai specifically is being powered from solar. 16% of Dubai electricity is coming from solar. 2,627 megawatt is being produced from the solar park. And not only focusing on solar, but even Dubai is thinking about different renewable energy projects. We have the first green hydrogen project as a pilot project in the MBR solar park to discuss the feasibility and to explore the feasibility of the green hydrogen production. We have also the hydroelectric pump station in Hatta with a capacity of 250 megawatt, which is under construction. And we also have in the solar park different technologies of solar. We are not focusing on the solar PV, photovoltaic. We also have the concentrated solar power with the highest storage, thermal storage capacity of 15 hours from the tallest tower, concentrated solar tower in the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park Phase 4, where we have the combination of photovoltaic as well as the CSP, as well as the parabolic trough configuration. So you can see that Dubai is very visionary in terms of looking ahead and playing ahead of time in order to reach the energy transition.
Thank you, and I'm sure we're going to revisit some of those inputs about what Dubai is doing. Deepak, I want to come to you. We see other countries around the world making a similar emphasis on renewable energy, decarbonization, following Dubai's sort of example of, in spite of their need for oil and energy sources, wanting to make that pivot. But you and I come from parts of the world where there are literally billions of people who haven't yet got energy, or when they do, it's precarious, to say the least. How do we balance transition with energy access at a very basic level? Your perspective.
So, very pertinent question, and the challenges of balancing developmental needs with also conserving our environment and avoiding climate change is a major, issue that is being, that's troubling a lot of the policymakers, and that's the reason why energy is a wicked problem as we know it. That even the solutions that you devise, end up creating newer challenges and requiring you to keep thinking on your feet. I'll take the example of India, since that's the geography I'm most familiar with, and also try and touch upon a few other geographies in my response to your question. So the access challenge has been, from last 10 years, there has been a sustained effort to, create a program for eradication of energy access, to the extent that the Ministry of Power rolled out, what is called the Village Electrification Program, ensuring that states were provided funds and technical support to, ensure that access reaches, every household. Now, it's debatable whether each and every household which is counted in a census or is outside the census is, connected or not. But definitely, to a large extent, the number of unelectrified people has come down. Of course, that has meant that then this has been achieved through a combination of both entrepreneurs who are setting up mini grids and in areas where the regular power grid hasn't reached. But at the same time, as the power grid also keeps expanding, questions around what happens to those mini grid operators. How do those assets get subsumed into the grid, and how are the economics of that being handled? Those are newer questions that are coming up. But the focus definitely now is shifting from mere electrification for, let's say, 2 or 3 light bulbs and maybe a fan to, how can energy, provide more productive usage? People creating So they're creating jobs and opportunities for themselves, and how can also energy be provided to critical loads like primary healthcare centers as well as disaster relief. I think the focus is shifting a lot towards that.
Thank you, Deepak. So, Mehmet, I'm going to come to you. We've had two quite local perspectives or national perspectives. You, of course, with your work in Shell, look at global energy scenarios. When you do look out at a global level at where energy is headed, what are sort of the big stories that we can tell on the different ends of what's possible in the future?
Sure, thanks. And I mean, you've touched on this already in your opening remarks, but we can't really talk about energy by solely focusing on energy. So we find it quite useful to think in terms of transitions. And when we get to that, the energy transition is, of course, the big one that, well, probably we'll talk about the most. But right now, the world is going through a huge geopolitical shift. So, it's not the world of the 20th century, but it is actually a world where we're seeing rising middle powers with very different operating models, very different governance models. And that actually is leading to a lot of change in terms of how we interface with energy and also collaboration around the world on issues of energy. We are seeing a transition in terms of climate and environment. So inevitably, as the effects of climate change are going to be more and more visible for all of us, it's going to affect how policies are made, it's going to affect decisions, it's going to affect societal reaction to issues of climate and environment. Then we have technology, of course, and I guess AI is the buzzword. We have sessions here on AI, but there's also other disruptors like quantum computing. We have no idea how that's going to change the world once it comes, if it comes. And so we really need to understand that from a less evolutionary, but more of a real transitionary piece. Then we have demographic change. So aging societies, we have huge migration waves, and we also have essentially an imminent rise of the global south that Deepak also pointed to. So these are all things that we need to look at, understand, and consider in order for us to be able to then talk about the energy system, and then the energy transition is another. And I'm sure you can pick up other transitions in the world as well, but these are the five that we really have focused on. And then if we frame this in the context of the Paris Agreement, and it's not perfect, but it's the closest thing we have to a consensus on this issue, on this topic, we then look at it from a carbon budget perspective. Again, simplified term, but at least we know we are time-bound. We know that we have less than a decade to be able to meet the goals of the actions that we need to take. And in that context, if we take that Paris Agreement perspective, then Shell has actually looked at two different scenarios recently. So we've, and if you go on our website, you'll find these. We have what we call archipelagos and Sky 2050. Those are our newest scenarios, and all the material is online, so I won't go into detail into those. But if I start with Sky 2050, Sky 2050 is really about how do you accomplish the goals of the Paris Agreement. So it's a normative scenario. And it's a world that we know that we have to get to in order to meet with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And we start from that point, and then we come back, what does it take to go from today to that future that we're looking at? The other scenario that we've looked at is archipelagos, which starts from the world as we know it today, which is not particularly collaborative. We're seeing regionalization. And energy security, especially with the Ukraine war, has really come to the fore of this. And now it's on top of policymakers' minds in terms of how do we deal with that issue. So you cannot really have that conversation without all these other metrics I'm referring to. And really what we're seeing more and more is, with the difficulties that we're seeing, realizing the transition, the speed that we need to realize it in, and realizing transition and having the positive effect that we need to have is becoming increasingly more difficult. Not impossible, but increasingly more difficult. And it really touches on the local examples of, great technological progress and vision like we see in Dubai, or finding a way of bringing those stakeholders in the global south in order to drive this. And I think that's probably the way I would frame it to start with.
Thank you for that. So colleagues, we are at the Dubai Future Foundation, at the Futures Forum, and so this really isn't an energy conference, it's a futures summit, right, of futurists. And so in the spirit of looking at the future, I want to push the boundary out a little bit further on the edge of novelty and really think for a minute about what could the future of energy look like that's not an extrapolation of the current trends, right, but a little bit more on the edge of what's possible. And certainly if I look at that as a futurist, if I look at the last 200, 300 years of energy, there's a very observable pattern in energy that for energy to exist, to be created, it had to be large scale, coal-fired power stations, oil refineries. It often had to be government controlled or government created. And by virtue of those two, large scale and government created, it meant that these were big, large scale, costly projects that were developed over the long term. And by virtue of the third, the long term, it meant that energy systems, by their nature, had to be centralized. And so we see this pattern, whether it's in oil, whether it's in coal, whether it's in gas, oil and gas, we see the centralization of energy and power, and there's a play on that word power, because with that came the centralization of power and petrostates and power structures that define how humanity has organized itself at a global level. Now, when we think out to the future and we start thinking about renewable energy, we start thinking about small-scale nuclear, we start thinking about the potential for fusion or fission, we start thinking about the way in which smart grids can connect with other smart grids through things like token communication, the digitization of the energy ecosystem. What that tells me as a futurist is that the fundamental organizing principle of energy might change. And what does the world look like in a world where an African community could adopt renewable energy at scale rapidly at a low cost in the form of microgrids, at the same time as a European or American community might adopt a small-scale nuclear reactor that powers 4,000 households and manage that privately through a civil society or civic structure? And so the question I want to put to our panelists is, when you look out at energy and the future of energy and you think about the energy that your grandchildren will use, what is that exciting possible future that has been disrupted by technology, that has been disrupted by new ways of organizing energy? If we could start with you.
So some of the things that I believe will be in the future, specifically in the renewable and solar field, is the utilization of advanced material. As you may know, since the 1950s, it was the first silicon-based solar cells that was fabricated. And you can see until today, still silicon is dominating the market with over 85% silicon-based photovoltaic panels. Now, if we look at, is it really reliable now to continue on this material? Definitely the answer is no, because we are almost reaching the limit of the efficiency of silicon-based photovoltaic panels. And that's why there is a huge research in terms of looking at alternative material that has more absorption compared to the silicon. And one of the recent trends, specifically in this aspect, is the discovery of perovskite material and the combination of the perovskite with silicon in a tandem structure. So one of the things that I believe might be in the future is the utilization of perovskite silicon tandem PV panels. In terms of the other aspect of energy transition, we can see that the electric vehicles and the hydrogen cars are now being in the market worldwide. So definitely there will be the advancement of these technologies to dominate the market. And specifically, if we look at the operation of the renewable energy project, you know that the challenge of intermittency of the renewable energy plants is one of the key challenges, and definitely the development of effective energy storage systems that will support the utilization of renewable energy projects. And this is, in a nutshell, some of the things that I believe will be in the future and will be definitely a key towards our energy transition.
Very exciting. I'm very tempted to start imagining a future where all the materials around us have been transformed in this way. Deepak, your perspective on that future?
Sure. So definitely, agree with what Dr. Aisha said about the importance of new materials. Possibly, I would even add, R&D that leads us to materials which, do not fall under the so-called critical banner that we are currently grappling with in terms of concentrations, in terms of geography or processing or potential harm to the environment during extraction. So I think that would be something I would add. I would also say that the future of energy would definitely be decentralized. A lot more people want, energy control in their hands, either it's through just solar panels on their houses or connecting it with battery and trying to go as off-grid as possible. Utilities thinking about transforming themselves as more from electron providers to service providers, be it whatever those services may be. Energy would also permeate, this transition would also permeate into whatever we use. For example, electric vehicles, how they also start becoming assets to the grid through the V2G technologies. The amount of data that we are going to use, particularly in terms of energy usage, and and so that way AI and data analytics, particularly with mining energy efficiency opportunities within the sector, I think that would be another transition that we see. And the last point that I would emphasize is that I feel that going forward we are going to design everything to be circular from the bottom up, because right now it's like an afterthought. You have your solar panels. How do you recycle them at the end of the life? Only a very small percentage is extractable. So thinking through building in circularity from the design is also what I think would start happening in the sector.
Thank you. Mehmet, of course, the private sector is going to be part of that play to bring about those new technologies. What does Shell see, or what do you see when you look out to that future?
Well, those two might be slightly different answers, but I think in terms of looking at the technology pathways, the one thing that, I can point to things like fusion, etc., and if it's about excitement, if it's about what might be very interesting to see how it radically transforms us. But what we're seeing as we look at the energy transition more and more seriously is that there isn't a single silver bullet. Essentially, it's a transition of lots of different technology pathways, lots of different ways of achieving a net zero energy system. So within that, there's a role for carbon capture and storage. Within that, there's a role for hydrogen. Within that, there's a role for energy efficiency and electrification. Actually, from a Shell perspective, I would say, CCS and hydrogen are probably two that will really help us in the interim. But I personally would actually point to the energy efficiency and that interface with data, the ability to software manage energy demand and being able to advance energy efficiency, because it's the lowest hanging fruit. It's the thing that we are not focusing enough on, and it's the thing that we have to at some point, because there isn't a way in which we maintain our quality of life as we live it today and also not have energy access. It just doesn't work. You need energy fundamentally in everything. So again, it's difficult to pick one thing, but the thing that I think connects all of these technologies and all these things is the smart management aspect. It's just what software can do, what AI can do, and that's the bit that I'm probably most excited about.
Very interesting. We're going to come to the floor for some questions in a second, but from what I'm hearing, if I visit Dubai in 2040 and I stay across the main road at the Plaza Hotel, as I'm doing, I might arrive at the hotel in a hydrogen-powered drone. The hotel on the outside might be clad with glass that is itself as a material generating energy, and the basement of the hotel might be some kind of energy storage device, maybe a salt-based liquefied battery. And as I walk through the corridor across the road from the train station here, my smart device that's probably implanted by then might communicate with me saying, you've consumed your quota of energy based on your own commitment to the transition and your own values. You might want to purchase something as a carbon offset. And while I'm doing that, the energy I am consuming, transforming from biological energy to thermal energy through my body as I'm walking, might be used by my clothing to charge my personal devices. And so this becomes a really integrated energy world where the user is at the center, quite conscious of their energy usage, where data plays a role, smart sensors play a role, new materials play a role. It's a very exciting future, potentially. And I have other questions, but first we want to hear from you. What are your questions about the future of energy?
So I'm Ryan from Malaysia. So global fuel subsidies total about $1 trillion last year, and such addictions, especially for global south and developing economies, is not helpful for this transition. It's actually stalling transitions. So how do we then formulate funding green energy projects, like for example, green hydrogen, and how do we disrupt obsolete government policies and fast track resistance transitions, because there's a lot of resistance in this space.
I actually have a question for this gentleman who actually spoke about geopolitics. You were talking about the grid. Let's talk about ethics. Decentralizing power grids, or we already have smart grids. We already have, or potentially they're piloting, they're actually operational. DEWA has that. We have a smart controllers and smart appliances and all that stuff. So with that, our grid is actually have a chance when it's feel like it, when it's about to the capacity, it could actually says, oh, okay, let me adjust your thermostats, or let me stop your dryer, or what have you, your can opener. Where's the ethics of that? If we decentralize all the power companies, those grid companies, and we become smaller, to serve the particular communities, how the ethics plays around. I have a lot of questions for Dewo, but maybe later. But
we're going to come back to that. That's a great question. Deepak, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, see, the current reality is that there are subsidies, but as we are looking at in a futures conference, I think hazarding a guess, I would say that governments also have a social contract to fulfill in addition to facilitating the energy transition, and increasingly, as they plan out retirements of these assets, whether they be coal, oil and gas, or all the let's categorize them under fossil. I think inevitably, as the energy mix changes, you would also, those subsidies would also transition away to, needy communities where renewable energy itself cost points are high. So there is going to be a transfer of those subsidies. We are not going to see an elimination, but this will happen only as the fossil fuel mix starts to reduce within the space.
Thank you. We might add some comments.
Yeah, I think specifically on the point of subsidies, and again, I don't want to speak on behalf of Shell on this because it's not my area, but there is I think when you look closely at subsidies, often there are things that are lumbered in there. So for example, there could be incentives for the decommissioning that you kind of deal with, and that counts as a kind of subsidy. If you look at kind of tax breaks that happen at a time because you're making certain investments in a country, that can count as a subsidy. So I don't know if we want to posit it exactly as, fossil fuels get subsidies and renewables down to green hydrogen doesn't, or another sector doesn't. And so I think it's a more nuanced conversation than that. But otherwise, yeah, I think I agree with Deepak said.
On the issue of ethics, did you want to add?
It's a great question. So I think, and maybe I'm presupposing here, but I think part of the question was coming from a place of the smarter our grids are, the smarter our energy use is, there is going to be somebody that decides how that energy is used. So it could be a government, it could be a regulator, it could be something else. I think there's a few things in there. One is the decentralized aspect of it. So it could be very well that a community is the one that's actually deciding this. They've kind of decided amongst themselves what makes most sense. But we could also imagine a world where it's abundance of energy, right? So decarbonizing is expensive, but there is a pathway in which we actually are able to decarbonize the energy mix without actually losing access to energy. And in that world, I'm not sure if the ethics of it is to do with, is there a mandate that you can't use a dryer at 5 in the morning? And is it more around the affordability of it? Then the question kind of comes, if essentially you have a fairly well-functioning society with access to, either funding or some kind of wealth distribution that works, then the ethics question becomes, I think, easier to deal with. Let me put it that way. I think where it becomes challenging is where it's a mandate system, where you're trying to reduce use of energy because you can't afford it in the same way, and then I think there are some great questions. But for example, we piloted this Shell, a project in the UNHCR refugee camp in East Africa, where there had been different mechanisms that were modeled there, where they were giving free access to energy, and it just wasn't sustainable. So then they started being given budgets, and so they'd have to pay for the energy that was given to them through a subsidy through the UNHCR agency. And we were supporting in terms of developing that business model. So how can you deploy a solar power panel, and then how do you deal with the intermittency, so diesel generators, and then how do you make the economics of it work? And if you actually give people that power over their energy use and you allowed them to budget, then you didn't really need anyone to intervene. You didn't really need anyone to come in and say, you're only allowed to use it this amount this way. So I guess the point of that is the market works if the market is fair. And that's the thing that I would probably focus on. But if you ask me about a mandated system, I think we would be here for hours talking about what are the ethics of those.
Thank you. It's not by accident that Adam Smith was a moral philosopher for raising this question of ethics. Two more questions, starting here at the back.
Thank you. Thank you for your insights. This morning we spoke about energy transition, and in this panel we are speaking about boundaries of energy. My question is, how could we evaluate this energy transition? Do we have qualitative, quantitative, or we have to mix both? Thank you.
Thank you so much. A question for the lady from Dubai, please. It's a little bit technical. I wondered how you're storing energy from your solar arrays. Thank you.
So specifically for the energy storage, we have two pilot projects that are currently being implemented at the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park. We have the lithium-ion battery and the sodium sulfur batteries that are being used to store the energy. We do have HETA project that is under construction. And we have, as I mentioned, the fourth phase, which is based on concentrated solar power as well as photovoltaic. The concentrated solar power stores the energy as a thermal energy. So the tower base is 15 hours and the parabolic trough is 12.5 hours.
Thank you. Deepak, do you have a view on the measuring transition?
Yes. So there are multiple measures. So, for example, the World Energy Council showed the trilemma. Similarly, the World Economic Forum has their model. But I'm more familiar with what a consortium called the System Change Lab produces. So where we monitor 42 indicators looking overall at a climate perspective. So the latest study indicates that there is only one indicator out of 42 that is well on track to meet all the net zero goals, and that is the share of electric vehicles as an overall vehicle population. The worrying thing is that 24 of these are well off track. That is, they're in the right direction, but the pace is well off. And 6 of them, particularly on the industrial decarbonization, and a couple of them in the power sector, they are headed in the opposite direction. That is actually worrying for us. So if I look at these 42 indicators, yes, there is still a long way to go, but we do have the technology, the business models, and possibly even the finance to bring that about.
I wanted to pick up on a point I believe you made earlier about how energy can transform culture, or culture can transform types of energy generation. Do you think in areas in need of rural electrification, do you think the smart move would be to put in the grid first and then wait for the innovation to come? Or do you take the innovation and say, okay, we can build a green energy production around that? It's kind of a chicken egg type thing, but I wonder what your thoughts were.
Hi, Roger Highfield from the Science Museum. I just want to frame COP28 discussions and just 2 simple questions. It sounds like we're saying that we think overshoot is inevitable, whatever happens at COP28. I wondered if the panel would agree with that. And if they do agree with that, whether, and again, just to frame green energy technologies properly, presumably carbon capture and storage is just as important as green energy production if we're going to deal with the overshoot.
A very short answer. I think exactly the chicken egg point. We just don't have time, so I think it all just needs to happen concurrently, and we don't know where the technology is going to be the most advanced, the most sophisticated. So I just don't think we can wait for one to come and then the other to drive the innovation. So I just think you're hearing a lot of noise about smart grids already, needing to deploy large-scale kind of integrated grids. I don't think there's another answer, frankly, personally. As for the gentleman's question, I don't think I would say that overshoot is inevitable. I think there is still a pathway in which it's not, though the closer you look at it, the less likely it appears. But I don't think so. And pointing back to Sky 2050, the scenario that we in Shell have looked at, how do you actually reach a world where you can meet the goals of the Paris Agreement? I think that's still something that we've demonstrated quite quantifiably that is possible. It just requires a lot of collaboration internationally, etc. But I would agree with the statement that essentially we're talking about decarbonization. That's the important thing. So there is a role for things like carbon capture and storage to play a role. And I think within that context, I don't want to say it's equally as important as another technology. As I've said, there isn't a silver bullet to this. But we're not going to get to a 2050 world without making use of a few pathways. We cannot sacrifice any other pathways. We need all of them, and we actually need more of all of it. So it's just going to be a very expensive transition, and we still have hope. We have looked at the overshoot scenario. So if you look at archipelagos, there's a lot of negative emissions that have to come on essentially to make up for it. A lot of it is direct air capture. Some of it tends to be bioenergy with CCS. So there are technology pathways, but unfortunately that still leads to a world where a lot of ecological damage is done, and then you're basically just not able to essentially you just have to accept that some of those damages. And maybe as just a closing remark, I think probably the most important aspect of this from our perspective is the public policy response. So I think we're fairly clear about climate change. We're fairly clear about what technologies are available to us. We know how difficult it is to change consumer behavior, but there are pathways for that. So when we think of the energy future, especially as the conversation is now very much around energy security, I think really we need to frame it in the context of the most important stakeholders in driving towards that future are going to be public policymakers. And in that context, the way we have tried to structure this or make sense of it is you really have, if you think of a 4x4 or 2x2 grid, you can think of countries that have exposure to supply disruption, so essentially they are not energy secure. And there are countries that are very vulnerable to price shocks, so they might be able to deal with the energy shock, but they need to pay exceedingly high price, and some countries are in a position to do so, like the EU that we've seen with the Ukraine crisis, and some countries just simply aren't. And Pakistan could be an example with the LNG cargoes being diverted away and what kind of fallout that leads to. So really, if you think of it in this context of affordability and supply, then you start making sense of what are decisions that you need to make in order to drive towards an energy future. And I think that's really the starting point, because that starts narrowing down, okay, these are the decisions that we can make, therefore these are the futures that it's going to probably drive. And that's the way we try to characterize it at the moment in the scenarios team, Michelle. So hopefully that's useful if you're thinking about this going forward. But thanks.
Thank you, Mehmet. Deepak.
So I agree with what Mohammed said, and I think the idea is to look at it as an energy basket perspective, not just be wedded to one particular technology, so that you end up using what is currently available and pull that overshoot back as much as possible. I think that's what I would advocate. And sir, to your question, I think being flexible in terms of policy and execution. For example, in India, we had the challenge of microgrids going into a place where grids hadn't reached, but then at one fine day, the state utility decided, I'm going to electrify the whole society. But when it got there and these guys were already present, there was a tweak in the regulation where these off-grid assets, so until then, there was a provision created to also get grid connected and be paid a feed-in tariff. So I think that kind of flexibility is what would take it forward. In terms of closing remarks, I would say that the energy transition is here to stay. And we really can't be stuck in a mode of there are going to be winners and losers in this transition. There is going to be a need for a regenerative and just future. For example, while we know about the downsides of fossil fuel assets, even renewable energy assets themselves aren't 100% benign. So if you take very large scale solar parks, the impacts that they have in terms of sacred groves of communities, land that is acquired from them, ecological impact. So I think all these also are going to play a significant role going forward. And only when these socio-economic impacts are also considered, that's when we'll have the true transition, not just in terms of electrons.
Thank you, Deepak. Dr. Aisha.
So as a closing remarks, I believe that our pathway towards energy transition is not only the responsibilities of government or industries, it's also the responsibilities of us as individuals. And I think one of the key aspects that we should also consider as individuals is to raise the awareness and also to consider the education part in terms of the involvement of youth, in terms of the involvement of the whole society to contribute to this energy transition. And I believe also the global efforts to be in terms of the collaboration, not only individual countries or individual cities to be working in silos, but it would require the global efforts to unite together toward this.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll agree with me that our panel has been most insightful. This is called the Dubai Futures Forum, and so it is a space for conversation. And so we're giving you back a few more minutes as the panel leaves to grab them in the doorway and have a further conversation and ask some of those burning questions. Please let's give them a hand and thank them for their contribution.